Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. This is going to be my, again, quite late December wrap-up. Oh, not technically that late. Anyway, it's going to be my December wrap-up. I read quite a bit this month, and really all across the, well, not all across the rating scale. I have some DNFs, and then I have some 3 stars and above, and I will just get into those because I have a lot to talk about. So, my first DNF of the month is Magic Knight Rayearth by Clamp. So this is a lesser read series of theirs. Clamp are basically a group of manga artists in Japan who publish under a shared name. They work collaboratively, and a lot of their series I really enjoy. This one just didn't work for me. I think that the magic system was just way too convenient to give it any proper stakes. So despite the fact that I like their art style and they tend to have a lot more heavier commentary and darker topics, that is what I enjoy in my comics, just didn't really work for me, so I DNF'd this. Next we have a mystery novel, and that is Truly Devious. So I've been really wanting to get into this series, but I decided to try the first novel and it just did not work for me. I really found that just the writing style didn't work. I don't know whether or not the mystery itself would have worked for me, but I found these sentences quite, I don't think stilted is the word, but very cold, very distant. I know that it was probably a very intentional thing on the part of the author to try and get across a very specific type of person as their main character, but it meant that I felt incredibly distant from the work, so it just wasn't holding my attention, so I DNF'd this one. Next we have Gender, a Graphic Guide. I need to stop reading graphic guides, so at least I didn't pay any money for this. I just found this on Scribd and I decided to give it a go. And I find that graphic guides don't tend to work for me. They're either way too basic or way too, not complicated in terms of what they're talking about, but in terms of very, very quickly going through quite complex things. And I find that they're marketed as ways in which people can gain a lot of this information and it be more accessible. But I find that if you were to take away all the images, I think that you would end up with the same book. And if you were to just have the images, they don't tell a story on their own. And I think that a graphic guide for me would have to be... Reg? No. A graphic guide for me would have to be something where those two complemented each other and you couldn't have one without the other. And this just didn't work for me. The next DNF I have is a graphic novel called Stage Dreams. This one, the art style didn't really work for me. I wanted to read it because it was queer. It's about a bandit who kidnaps someone and how they have to work together to achieve a goal. And I really enjoyed what it set out to do. It was trying to highlight the queer and gender non-conforming and trans people in this point in American history, but the plot didn't really work for me. I thought that it was trying to go for very grey morality, and I just feel like it didn't give itself enough setup in order to get that across, so it just DNF for me. Although if you would find the subject interesting, I really hope this does find its audience. The next DNF I have is Girls Can Kiss Now. I definitely wanted to read this as I saw it in the Goodreads Choice Awards this year, and the humour just didn't work for me. I think that it relies very heavily on it being relatable to the reader's experience, especially the reader's experiences over celebrity culture, especially queer celebrity culture. I'm sure that this is the sort of book that will work really well for a certain type of reader. I think that if you are a millennial and you have actively sought out a lot of celebrity culture, I think that this could really work. I can see the appeal. I can see that it does do a lot to not categorize, but to not even chronicle. What am I doing? I'm going to go with chronicle, to chronicle queer celebrity culture and how that impacted people. I think it was also really nicely threaded through as well with a lot of the author's own experiences, and I think that she clearly was willing to be very vulnerable and tell stories that maybe aren't the nicest for her or don't make her look like the nicest person, I guess. But I think that that normally does work for me in a sort of memoir situation, but just not for me. And the last DNF I have is The Great Believers. I started this off as a book club read, and I think it's a case of it's me and not the book. It's very clear that this has a lot of literary merit. It won a bunch of awards. It was clearly very well written. There was just nothing pulling me back to it. Like, I was having a fine time while I was reading, but I really struggled to get back to it once I put it down. And yeah, I think that it does a really good job of chronicling the lives of gay people in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic. It really served to highlight and humanize that tragedy. I think for me, another thing that meant I didn't want to go back to it was that I thought the modern timeline was weaker. I didn't quite know why it was there. I'm sure that it would have connected in certain ways if I had gone further in, but it just didn't really work for me. So I can recognise that this book is a good book, but yeah, I'm not going to finish it. So next on to my 3 stars, and I hope I've got the right book for this one because I just cannot remember remember the title. I mean, you can tell by the fact that I gave it 3 stars. But the next book I have to talk about is Losing Streak, I think by Edith Russo. I hope I've got that one right. Yeah, this one I think had a really good setup, but in terms of the plot, kind of meandered around and then ended. It's about a very high profile person in the workforce who has had to work incredibly hard to get to where she is and tends to be very hard on those under her that work under her. We then follow another person who, because of the fact that she's incredibly clumsy and the fact that she just works in a certain style and needs a certain type of guidance in work, has not been able to hold down a job. And through unexpected circumstances, oh gosh, my ring light just, okay. My ring light's being funny, I don't know why. Because of some extenuating circumstances, she ends up being the new assistant to this very high-powered person. And they strike up a friendship and eventually a relationship. So there's a lot of commentary on power dynamics in that sort of relationship. A lot of that is questioned. So that is something that is brought up. It's not just sort of thrown away that like, oh, we need to have this to happen to make the romance happen. No, it does get questioned. It does get brought up. I also found something really interesting about what this was talking about was with how some people, it's not that they're stupid or incapable, it's that they haven't been managed well. And I think that's incredibly important to know when you're managing people, not to just use the same mold for everyone. It's not going to work. And how some people can really succeed when under the right management. I thought there were some really big plot conveniences, especially with one of the characters' relationships with her sister, who is also at the company. And like I said, it just kind of sets it up really well and then meanders around a little bit and then just ends. I think that this could have been a little bit longer and had more of a concrete arc, and I think it could have been a lot better, but yeah, I didn't really like how it ended. Next 3 star I have is It Was You All Along. Can't remember who this is by, but it's got a 3 because I feel very mixed about it. This follows a trans man trying to find work in the caregiver live-in care worker sector, and because of his gender, he finds that he can't get a job and he becomes really desperate. So he thinks that the only way that he will get hired is essentially to stop taking hormones, to detransition, and to apply under his dead name and as like pretending to be a woman, which he does get hired. And then it's about how he then meets someone that he didn't expect to in his next job, who knew him as his true gender. And so there's a lot of questionable deception in here. I also feel very, very hesitant to recommend this broadly, especially when there is so much narrative around why people would detransition and how that affects the access of people who actively need to transition, how it affects their access to healthcare, and especially like how people perceive that need. And the only reason why I think it did work in a way, or I feel less weird about it, is the fact that it was written by a trans author. So I'm not trans, I can't have that commentary. I think that please do seek out other trans reviewers about how they feel those things went down. I also felt that my other problem with it was the time that it was set. I think that because there's a costume party element in the story and the cover leans very heavily into that costume party element, I was under the impression that it was set in a older time period than it actually was. So that was really confusing going through the book. So yeah, it was a middling read. So if this does interest you, maybe look at some trans reviews and see how you feel about it. Next 3-star I have is Pillow Thoughts. This is a collection of poetry. I found some of these really interesting, some of them really good. This is not the sort of poetry that will go way over your head, as I have a problem with some poetry doing so, but it just wasn't that impactful for me, so it was just kind of a fine read. Second to last 3-star I have is 100 Ghosts. This got a middle of the road read, I think, almost because of not intentions I had going in, expectations I had going in. I thought this was going to be some sort of commentary, but it was literally just a collection of 100 ghosts, but just the ghosts were drawn into different items. I thought it was going to play on puns or play on fears, or just like, I thought it was going to be something more. So just, if this art style seems interesting to you, just I think go into it with the right expectations, because it was fine. And the final 3-star I have is The Tin Violin by Alan M. Kent. So this is a play set in Cornwall and following a black man who is stolen from his home and sort of put through the slave trade, and then is taught to play the violin. He's always been a very passionate musician. So it is based on the life of a real person. But one, I thought that this play was just kind of okay, but also this is a sort of play that doesn't work very well just reading it. Some plays can be an excellent reading experience and you can really visualize how it would be put on, but I don't think this is one of them. Something that was very prominent in here was music, and they were talking about the types of music that was being played and the way that Cornish was blending in with the music from where he was from, and you just lose that impact when you can't hear the music from it. So it wasn't a very impactful reading experience. So this was just fine. Now on to my 3.5 stars. So first of all, I have The Good Witch of the West, Volume 1. So this one, I do own Volume 2, so I thought I'd give it a go. I'm undecided as to whether or not I am going to complete this series, although it's not too many books, so I might. So this follows a young woman who, her father is very recluse. She doesn't know who her mother was. She's very happy living in her rural town with her best friend, and she finally gets the opportunity to go to a party, and then something at that party starts to turn her whole life upside down. This is my perfect blend of storyline that starts hitting darker topics and gets dark. My issue was with the transition between scenes. It felt very stilted and rushed every time it would change perspectives. So it was an enjoyable enough read. Maybe I'll give volume 2 a go and see if the problems are fixed by that point. If not, maybe I won't continue. Next is a graphic novel, and it's kind of a graphic guide, kind of not, but this was a quick and easy guide to queer and trans identities. I often pick these things up just as working out what I would recommend to someone if they came to me asking for guides. And in terms of like graphic guides, I think this has been the best one that I've read so far. I think that it did a really good job of explaining a lot of things, especially at the level of someone who is just being introduced to these concepts. It didn't really teach me anything new, but the art style was good. I thought that the level of information was really good. It was very diverse in what it was talking about. It didn't just speak about LGBT, it did go further than that. And it's one I would recommend, but didn't do too much for me. So next I have a couple more Audible originals that I was listening to. So I listened to My Transgender Coming Out Story. Something that I think was a big theme in this one was about having representation out there and the true power of hearing other people's stories, and how if the only people who are in the media and who you hear about are the types of stories that you do not identify with, then sometimes you feel like you can't be part of a community. And I feel like that's a really powerful thing for this story to be doing. It's out there to be representation, and I'm glad that these stories are starting to exist and starting to exist on bigger platforms. I just hope that this does mean that bigger platforms do start letting people from marginalised groups not just tell non-fiction, not just tell about hardship, but start to write about these characters living happy lives, happy, diverse lives. So this was a good experience, but with it being that short, it wasn't going to be the most amazing top tier thing I've ever read. This next one is another one of the Audible originals, and that is You Do You. This was essentially a collection of stories from different people about their lives. I think this worked for me a lot more than a couple of other books I've tried to read in this vein, mainly because I knew a lot of the people they were talking about, and each of the stories was incredibly short, because I'm not normally one for memoirs in terms of non-fiction, but I thought this was an incredibly well done one. It's very quick to get through, and I highly recommend if you're just looking for an easy read. Another one in that same vein that is very, very similar is Coming Out Party. So again, a bunch of queer people telling their story. So both of those I would put on par with each other. The next book I have is a graphic novel I read, and that is Deco Boko Sugar Days. This is a queer graphic novel. I really liked the art style. It was funny and cute. There is a sequel that I think I'll probably read. I need to read before I kind of forget the plot of the rest of it. But it was kind of fine. I think that you had these two characters where it was very much opposites attract. It was them coming to the realization about their own feelings or getting to express their own feelings. It was very cute. I probably won't ever reread this. The next one I have is another quite short one, but it is a short story collections called The Artists of Love, and it all centres around a group of sex workers living in this building in New York. And I thought that it was really interesting commentary on being a sex worker and having a relationship as a sex worker. I think that there was a lot of diversity in there. It was a really enjoyable read. But again, being that short, it wasn't going to be mind-blowing, so I would recommend, but just go into it with the right expectations. So, and finally, I have some graphic novels, which I'm pretty sure I have copies of. So yes, I have these 3 graphic novels that I read this month that I give 3.5 stars. So we have, I don't know how this is supposed to be pronounced, because when it's in the bind-ups, when I've seen it in the shops, it just has X/1999, I'm assuming. So we have Prelude, we have Overture, and we have Sonata. Now, these are more stories by Clamp, the group of artists. Again, it's the whole comic that gets darker, gets more serious, tackles some more heavy topics. But it's been less than a month probably since I read these, and I really cannot remember a thing. Like, I thought it was a trilogy, first of all, so I thought I was getting the whole story. But apparently there's like 14 volumes in the series. I can't quite remember now. But from what I remember, it's about a sibling pair, boy and a girl, who get on really well. They had a childhood friend who moved away when they were younger. That childhood friend has moved back and is clearly changed and is clearly doesn't seem to want to be close to them anymore. And yeah, I think that it had the trope of someone kind of pretending to be an asshole in order to protect the people that he loves. Other than that, I could not tell you a single other thing that happened. I remember some person trying to create a magical barrier and some people from different factions trying to find one of the characters, and how they were like having a bit of back and forth in terms of, oh no, you go first, be my guest, but then battling. It was very just not really a memorable series, so I will be unhauling these. I mean, spoiler for my unhaul, I guess.